Ever heard of Isinglass? Something that helps clarify beer and how it became okay to use in beer by rabbis? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss on this 177th episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest of the show, Rabbi Elli Fischer. Rabbi Fischer, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right, so for those less familiar with Rabbi Fischer, he is an independent writer, translator, and rabbi. Previously, he was the JLIC rabbi and campus educator at Maryland Hillel. He holds BA and MS degrees from Yeshiva University, rabbinical ordination from Israel's chief rabbinate, and is working toward a doctorate in Jewish history. He is a founding editor of The Lair House, a web magazine of contemporary Jewish thought. His original writing has appeared in numerous Jewish publications. Among the issues he writes about are the history of halakha, religion and politics in Israel, the interplay between legal and non-legal elements of the Talmud, and Central European Jewish history. He edited 10 volumes of Rabbi Eliezer Melamed's Panini Halakha series in English and is a co-founder of Hamapa, a project that applies quantitative analysis to rabbinic literature. And is that to rabbinic literature? Is that to what types of literature is Hamapa? What does that cover?
It's mainly responsa. Right, so we're going to be talking about the Nodà Yehuda. We have some really nice maps about the Nodà Yehuda, like awesome. Where he wrote his responsa to.
Okay, when I hear rabbinic literature, I think of Sefer Chazal, like rabbinic literature, like Talmud, Mishnah.
Right, so it's
more responsa literature. You mean?
Yeah, Shelot Uchuvot.
Yeah,
and the sort of the question that the question that I was looking into that sort of led me down that path was. The question of like what are the dynamics of trust building? What are the dynamics of reputation and expertise? How did everybody know that the Nodà Yehuda is the guy to ask their questions to?
Which is a fantastic segue to Rabbi Landau himself, the author of Nodà Yehuda. So what can you, I love this question about authority. What can you share with us about Rabbi Yeḥezkel Landau, the author of the content we're talking about today, and then also his body of literature, Nodà Yehuda, his responsa literature.
He lived, his life basically spanned the 18th century. He died in 1793 at the age of about 80. So, really his adult life is the second half of the 18th century, which is an interesting era, right? It's when we talk about modernity in the modern era, we're talking about processes that begin in the second half of that century. So he's right there, and he's in Central Europe. He's in the last 40 years of his life he lived in Prague. He was, to use the term that my teacher from high school, but who's a professor at Johns Hopkins these days, Rabbi David Katz, who did his dissertation on the Nodà Yehuda, calls a super rabbi. Right. So I don't know if that's, he's just trying to translate, a gadol, right? But he actually was involved in a lot of the major controversies in Europe in the latter part of the 18th century, including the Cleves Get and the question of Sabbatianism, even early Chassidut.
Someone did a dissertation on Rabbi Landau, or more specifically Nodà Yehuda?
3 people, all within about 10 years of each other.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
There are 3 dissertations that were all in the early 2000s, in which the Nodà Yehuda is like a major. There could be more, but those 3 are sort of like the state of the field. One of them is David Katz from Hopkins. The other one is Professor Maoz Kahana from Tel Aviv University. Also, my teacher. He wrote about the Nodà Yehuda and the Chassam Sofer, and sort of like as 2 major figures who are, the Nodà Yehuda is the generation before, Chassam Sofer is the generation after, and there's a lot to say about the sort of like the fascinating dynamic of the relationship between them. They only met once, but they were sort of the major rabbinic figures in one generation after the other, and they're night and day. They're extremely different. They're extraordinarily different in many, many ways. And the third one is Sharon Flato. I don't know if it's Flato or Flato. Yeah.
And her what was her topic on for Rabbi Landau?
The Nodע Yehuda in sort of within the culture, specifically the Kabbalistic culture of 18th century Prague.
What can you tell us about this Nodע Yehuda body of literature, these responses of his? And you mentioned earlier, you also look at the authoritativeness. How do things take on a sense of authority? So what's the significance of Nodع Yehuda, and also how did Rabbi Landau come about writing this whole body?
It's an interesting thing, right? There are two volumes of Nodע Yehuda, right? מהדורא Kama, מהדורא Tinyana. מהדורא Kama, the first volume, appeared in the year 1776. It's an easy year to remember. A couple of interesting things are happening in the world at that time. One is, he was born, the Nodע Yehuda was born in Poland, right? He to a well pedigreed rabbinic Polish family. He studied in the Brody Klois, which is, it was in what was then Poland. Okay, in a year, and he had a couple of, he had several rabbinic positions until he gets to Prague, which was really one of the biggest Jewish communities in all of Europe in his day. Wow. And then what happened in 1772? The three emerging empires of Europe, which is the Habsburgs and the Russian Empire and the Prussians, they look over at Poland and they just see a giant pizza, and they all want a slice.
It's not the only time in history. Not the only time.
Well, this was the big one, the partition of Poland, right?
Okay.
The famed Polish partitions, right? They, over the next 25 years, they just sliced and diced Poland out of existence.
Oh, wow.
Poland, which had been, it was the largest and most populous state in Europe for much of the 14th through 18th centuries. It was big, and it was, and that's where the bulk of Ashkenazic Jews were, right? Which at that time already was the bulk of the world's Jews. And all of a sudden they get diced up, and they, part of it goes to Russia, part of it goes to Prussia, and a chunk of it goes to the Habsburgs. Right now, the Habsburgs, a couple of things going on. Right, number one, Prague is also in the Habsburg realms. Right, this is under the Empress Maria Theresa. That chunk of Poland that went to Austria, that went to the Habsburgs in the first stage of the partition, was given a name, and that name is Galicia. So whenever you hear people talking about Galicia, Galicianers, that's the territory that it's talking about. Today, it's divided between Ukraine and Poland, right? The Western Galicia is in today's Poland, Eastern Galicia, which is more populous and where you had the bigger communities of like Lviv and Brody, and a million others like Ternopil and Stanislav and Stry.
If I remember, my Wikipediaing is correct, most of Brody's population was Jewish, right? Or probably throughout this time?
Yeah, Brody was probably, it's what you call a shtetl, right? One of these towns where it's a town, meaning it's not a village. It's not, it could be 5,000, 10,000 people. It could be, 40, 50,000 people, and 50, 60, 70% of the population is Jewish. It's very much a Jewish metropolis. And there was money in Brody. There were wealthy Jews in Brody.
Do we know when this teshuvah of his is written?
It is number 26 in מהדורא Kama. Right?
So it's the 1776.
1776 is when it's published.
Yes.
But I think that you can identify when it was written, because if you look at the previous, you look at how the tshuva starts, right? It says, Al devar hakruk v'yesh korin oso hoizenblasen, right? Regarding this thing called kruk or hoizenblasen, Yehu shal puchis shal dag echad hanikra hoizen. Right, it is the bladder of a fish called hoisin dag tame, and it is a non-kosher fish. Okay, that's his. Okay, so when you see a tshuva that starts with that phrase al devar hakruk, it generally means that he received a question with, he received a letter with several questions, and he's answering them one after the other. And he divides them into different simanim, but these are the same, but it's the same
questioner or same letter.
But it's the same questioner. The previous tshuva starts Tshuva leharav hamufla Morenu harav Wolf Emmerich. That's who he's writing to. I don't know much about this. I don't know anything about this Wolf Emmerich. On this one, there's no date. I think I saw something about 1771, but I don't know where I saw that.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. If you like listening to an episode about a rabbinic responsum about drinking, well, you're in luck, because that's what our next week's episode is going to be about. Here's a sneak peek featuring Rabbi Clapper.
What's the best way to get the kind of people who drink in bars to stay from?
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek featuring Rabbi Aryeh Clapper on our episode next week, which is also a rabbinic responsum. Now back into this episode featuring Rabbi Elli Fischer.
Something I did a little investigating before this, which is, and I was trying to figure, like, why is this question just now arising? Like, why now? And so one thing I saw, which is not the most helpful thing, is that by 1761, they're importing it from, I guess, the Russia area into Britain. But that doesn't necessarily, but he's obviously operating in Europe. So if it's already being imported by 1761, it's clearly been in use in definitely the 1750s, if not already the 1740s. Or maybe it's just becoming more widespread at this point in time for this area.
Well, let's take a look at the first paragraph where he sets out the question, because I think that'll give us some clues.
Yeah.
So first of all, the first thing that jumps out, we already read the first couple of lines. So what's the technique? You dry out this bladder, and you place it inside this beverage. Shekorim bepolin med. Mead vash. We're talking about
mead.
We're talking about med. We're not talking about beer. Different drink.
Okay,
honey
it's mead.
Yeah, mead. But it was pronounced med. Mead vash, or honey water. Vitiv right? The nature of this thing is lehashkia hashmarim, right? It makes the lees, makes the sediments sink. Lahatzlil hamashka, and clarifies the beverage. Ukvar noagin bezeh kazeh be'ashkenaz. There's already a minhag in Ashkenaz. Litenoto litochaviot shel yayin, to place it in barrels of wine, mitam zeh, for this very reason. V'zeh kemo esrim shana, about 20 years ago, hitchilu gam bePolin lasot kain. They started doing the same thing in Poland. B'mashke meid vash shekorim med, with med. And it's oraru gedolei hador al zeh. Right. And so all of the great rabbis of the generation were exercised by this. Right, that you should asr, that this should be asr. Because it remains inside the beverage, meaning this Huizenblasen, right, which is Isinglass, remains in the beverage. Ve'kavush kimevushal. And there's a principle when it comes to the transfer of taste, right? That flavor can be transferred not just by cooking, but also by steeping, pickling, right? Leaving something in a beverage in a liquid medium for a long time. But you might say that it's batal b'shishim, meaning the quantities are so small that it doesn't rise to 1/60th of the entire mixture. We have a principle that you can't do that lechatchila. If a little bit of non-kosher something fell into the cholent pot and it's less than 1/60th, then it's okay. But you can't go ahead and do that lechatchila, or a little bit of something that's not kosher into your cholent, even if it's less than 1/60th. So this would be a case of bittul iser lechatchila. And there are people that wanted to permit it. Why? Because it's already dried out. It's like a piece of wood. She'ein bo tam klal. It has no taste at all. There's no flavor at all. Umidaminoto laor hakeva, right? Which is similar to a principle that we see with the stomach, right? Fermenting things in the stomach of an animal, that once it's dried out, it's much less problematic. And there are some people that want to be matir. They only say if you're doing that on purpose, right? your intent is to be mevatel, this thing that's prohibited. But here, that's not your purpose. Your purpose is to clarify the beverage.
Yeah.
Kana kavana rak lahatzliel. Below litain tam. You're not trying to add flavor. You're trying to get rid of something.
Just clarify.
Yeah. What's that?
Just to clarify, not to provide flavor.
Just to clarify, not to provide flavor.
Yeah.
Kvar harich bazeh harbe kavod ben dodati. Right. My cousin, right, my aunt's son, wrote at length about this. Harav Amor Gadol Moreno Rav Yosef Av Bezdin Viram de Kahal Kadosh Ir Chadash Bigalil Krakow. The Halala Isser. In this place called Ir Chadash. I will tell you in a second what the Ir Chadash near Krakow is.
Okay, I was curious. An Ir Chadash. Okay.
No, Ir Chadash, okay.
It's a new settlement. It's a new village, maybe.
No, that's not what it is at all. Oh. It's just that's the name of the place. And
it's called Ir Chadash. It's called Newtown, New City.
Yeah. Have you heard of Newton, Massachusetts?
Yeah. Oh, this is the same.
Yeah, well, it means Newtown. Okay. Have you heard of Villanova?
Okay.
Okay. Right. And in Poland, it would be called Nowe Mesto or something like that. In any Slavic speaking country, and in Germany, it would be called Neustadt.
Okay.
This is it. It's Novi Miasto.
Yeah. So his cousin is trying to forbid it, and then this final line of this first paragraph is "Lofisha kavar nit pashet hamin hagla hatir bim dinos ashkenaz folin." So he says this is already spread in a permissible fashion across Germany and Poland. Amarti leakso.
Well, not in a nit pashet hamin hagla hatir. The custom the permissive custom has already spread out. Meaning everybody is treating this as though it's okay.
Well, also he said earlier this has been going on for a couple of decades already, and people have been, which is interesting. Like it's just happening, and now this is, I guess, I don't know, maybe enough rabbinic steam has been coming up. Now it's coming to a head. Maybe I don't know why.
Well, so I think that's part of it, right? Meaning what's going on is people started doing this, and people think that it's okay. And then at a certain point, the rabbis got wind of this and are like, hey, I don't understand how they can do this. This is not okay to do this. This is problematic to do this.
Yeah.
We should say that it's usser. And then Nodà Yehuda is saying, like, look, everybody's already doing it. I'm going to get involved here because I think it's important to articulate why it's okay.
And also, in addition to this being going on for a couple of decades, and that seems like with just mead, but it sounded like from the way he wrote.
Wine. He says that in Germany it was wine, in Poland it was mead.
So I was understanding there's two separate things, that the mead insertion of Isinglass was going on for a couple of decades, but even before that, it was already happening with wine. But you're saying there are sort of two tandem issues, that people have been doing this for a couple of decades for either mead or wine. You're
right. They were doing it even earlier. So 20 years ago, they started doing this in Poland as well. So they were doing it even longer in Ashkenaz.
Right. So they'd already been doing this with wine barrels prior to 20 years ago, and with mead in Poland, this has already been going on for a couple of decades now.
Right. So if you're saying that, if we're saying that this tshuva at the very earliest is written in 1776, which means that we're talking about 1756.
Right. So it's been going on definitely in the 1750s and 60s for the mead, and then maybe 1740s, 30s for the wine barrels.
Maybe it seems that he doesn't even know.
Right. It's been happening.
Yeah.
And really, even that final line, he's like, this is already spread across Germany and Poland. Like this has been happening.
Everybody says that it's okay, so we got to figure out why it's okay.
I'm very glad that you pushed us to talk about this first paragraph, which sets up the question. This is not a short teshuvah throughout the remainder of it.
No, it's not.
It's very much not. And he obviously uses these topics, these problems, but this is not the extent. He talks about a multiplicity of other issues that arise and topics and ideas, especially from, you mentioned Shas and Poskim, right? The Talmud and halachic decisors. So he brings up a variety of Talmudic issues that pertain to this topic.
Yeah.
Including the kavush kamavoshel and ein right?
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing that like most of his tshuvot are not this long.
Oh, this stands out in its lengthiness for him.
Oh yeah. Big
Oh
time.
wow. Oh wow.
I mean, even if you just look at the page beforehand, or you look at the page, it ends on in my edition on page Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay. After, let's just give an idea where it starts. It starts on 9b, and it ends on 13a, right? So it's 3 full two-sided pages plus 1, right? So it's 3.5 of these pages. Each of these pages has 2, each side of a page has 2 dense columns of text. So you're talking about, you're talking about 14 columns.
Wow.
Right. And then on the last page, right, the last page where you have, Siman Chavav finally ends, and you have Siman Chav Zayin, which is a paragraph, Siman Chav Chet, which is 2 paragraphs, Siman Chav Tet, which is 2 paragraphs, all in the same two columns, right? So after 14 columns of this one, the next column after that has 3 complete tshuvot.
Okay. So this does stand out for this.
It does.
It's like that. And I'm kind of curious with the interplay of the empirical nature of this or him, but being applied to this topic.
Right. So I think that a lot of what's going on here is, number one, when you want to be makil, you have to be more thorough, right? You have to cover every base. Right? It's much easier to be machmer, to raise an issue that would make it prohibited. If you want to permit it, you have to raise all the issues and show why they're not issues. Number one. Number two, it seemed as though it was already being discussed, right? There were a lot of people who were writing about it, right? So he's dealing either implicitly or explicitly with things that other people wrote, meaning he's familiar with other writings on this, including that of his cousin, who was the rabbi of Nova Miasto.
Hello, dear listeners. It's your host, Rabbi Drew. I wanted to break in right now and just say, hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate, or watching, however you're consuming this content. And I'm always open for new ideas, both for specifically the Jewish Drinking Show, whether it's topics, whether it's guests. I'm also looking for other resources that I can provide you with in the Jewish Drinking Project more broadly. Also, I'd really like to offer you the opportunity to sponsor this work. Whether if you want to go to patreon.com/Jewish Drinking, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have ideas for swag, also, please feel free to send them to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. All right, thank you so much, L'chaim, and now back into the episode.
It happens to be, if you Google today, what do kashrut organizations today do? Every kashrut organization will say it's okay, it's kosher. But some of them will say, and yet we don't, we prefer to use other clarifying agents. We don't use Isinglass anymore, right? Meaning there's like a certain sense of like, you shouldn't use it if you don't have to use it, even though everybody thinks it's okay. And, they all quote the Nodà Yehuda. The Nodà Yehuda is the final word on this.
So I definitely want to get back to that. I want to circle back to the legacy a little bit later, but yes, I like where your head's at. You mentioned about the having to be voluminous on account of seeking to permit. There's a whole bunch of topics that he brings up. I mean, I don't know if you want to even do a top 5 list of the topics not even. I mean, there needs to be a top 5. You could do a top 10.
It is. I mean, look,
you could do a top 20. He brings up so many different aspects.
What we can do is let's look at the last paragraph.
I like that.
Okay, the last paragraph, he sort of like goes through a little checklist. Right? Let's bundle together all of the reasons to be lenient. Right? To bring them all together on the matter of the Heusenblasen. The first one. Because it's dried out, it's not food. Tuma, it's not food it's not considered treif. Who hadin le'inyan iser. Right, it loses its status as tameh, and if it loses its status as tameh, it also loses its status as forbidden. And then he goes into a separate thing because, right,
I do want to point out
whether or not
I do want to point out we actually haven't translated Heusenblasen, and so the blas or the bloisen is bladders, and the Heusen is the sturgeon.
Is the name of the fish.
Is the sturgeon,
right?
And a lot of this. A lot of this,
kind
by the way, a
sturgeon.
lot of these sturgeons were coming from the Caspian Sea. Fun fact.
Hang on. No. Back up.
They weren't?
Back up. No.
I like to be corrected. This is great.
Okay. I mean, there were sturgeons. First of all, we say sturgeon as though it's one species of fish. There are a number of species of sturgeon.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, there is a tshuva in Nodà Yehuda Mahadura Tinyana, meaning the second, right? In Yora Siman Kafchet,
yeah,
where the Nodà Yehuda writes to Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Segal of, it'll say on it, Tet Vav apostrophe Vav, and I am nearly 100% certain that is Temeshvar, right? Timisoara, which is today in southwestern Romania, near the border with Hungary and Serbia. Okay, where the question came up about whether or not a fish called shtirel is permitted. Okay. And he writes, this is one of my all-time favorites. Michtavo higiani mocharat Yom Kippurim im hadag. Right, I got your letter the day after Yom Kippur, along with the fish.
Wow.
This rabbi from Temeshvar sent, 600 miles. He sent the fish to the Nodà Yehuda. Like, so imagine like Mrs. Nodà Yehuda is, minding her own business the day after Yom Kippur. And all of a sudden, like FedEx shows up at the Nodà Yehuda's door and says, I have a package for you. And I got to tell you, ma'am, it stinks. It's called shtirel. It's definitely a sturgeon, but it's probably meaning it could be a generic term for sturgeon, whereas the shtirel, which is the what's known today as sterlet, is a particular species of, and a particularly small species of sturgeon.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot on this stuff.
Okay. Wow. All right. So the hoisin is some type of sturgeon, right?
Yes.
As long as it's definitely non-kosher type of sturgeon, and the boysen is definitely the bladder.
And the blazen is the bladder.
Yeah.
But it's not a bladder. It's a swim bladder.
Oh, okay. Specifically,
right?
Swim bladder. Okay.
Yes, it's a bladder, but a bladder is just basically is an organ that can inflate and contain stuff, right? So this is a swim bladder, right? It inflates or deflates, depending on whether or not the fish will inflate it if it wants to rise to the surface, deflate it if it wants to dive. It's not like it's not a urinary bladder.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'm glad I mentioned it. I'm glad you broke down the word hoisin.
Like he wants to do a summary here, but then he says like there's a question of whether or not, like, what's the relationship? There's certain things that are not things that are not kosher are also ritually impure, are also tameh. And he's getting into the question of what's the relationship between the ritual impurity and the non-kosher status of something. Right. So he says, if you think that it's basically one implies the other, then if it's dried out, it's not tameh. And so if it's dried out, it wouldn't be prohibited to consume. But even if you don't assume that anything that if you assume that there's something can be prohibited from eating, even if it lost its tuma, right? That's what he says here. Liman de yalif isur mituma. You learn out the non-kosher status, the prohibited to eat status, from its impure status. Afilu man de lo yalif, even one who doesn't make that equation, who rak chumra derabanan, right? That's because it's a chumra derabanan. It's a midirabanan that you would have to treat it as being non-kosher to eat. It's a chumrah.
It's a rabbinic stringency.
It's a rabbinic stringency, and in this case, ra'ui lilech achar hamekel. Right? We should follow the lenient position because we're talking about a chumrah midirabanan, right? And we have principles about this, right? If there's a suffix about a chumrah midirabanan, we generally go lakud. Okay, ela da'akati. But still, this doesn't get out of the problem of lechatchila. You shouldn't do it ab initio, right? You shouldn't put it in there knowing that it's non-kosher, knowing that you're putting it into your food.
Yeah.
Really, lechatchila, you should be concerned about the view of the stringent view, the lo neilif isur mituma, that we don't equate that we don't derive the non-kosher status from the impure status. Vikatavti, and I wrote, right, this is his recap. The Hoisenblasen she'enam ru'uyim b'fnei atzmo, since nobody would eat that, like you're not going to eat fish bladder chips, right?
Yeah.
So in kan rakatam habatal b'shishim. There's not, you don't eat them by themselves. So all you have here is the flavor, and the flavor is batal b'shishim, right? There's the thing itself. You don't want it. You don't. In fact, you try to fish it out. Sorry, pardon the pun. You try to take it out.
It's appropriate.
Right? It falls to the bottom, and you take it out. Afilu hamachmirim lo hichmiru afilu b'derabanan afilu miderabanan. Right. So even the people that want to be machmir, they're not machmir in this case. And this entire principle of ein mevatlin iser lechatchila is a derabanan principle. So you can rely on the view that there's no iser here at all, and if there's no iser, there's no bittul iser lechatchila, meaning you can take the lenient view, because in a question of a derabanan, you can take a lenient view. Ein kan iser klal dialfin and mituma va'od. Moreover, tzir dagim urak derabanan, right? The brine of fish is only aser derabanan. Afilu bekavush, even if it was been in,
pickled.
If it's been pickled.
Yeah.
Umela be'aser derabanan in kavush oser yoser miklipa. Right. We can, these are the. He's raising issue after issue, and just sort of saying that like it's all you're talking about multiple derabanans on derabanans. Principles that are derabanan that you want to apply in something that might not be usher at all, and so you can say that we could be makel, we can be lenient. Mamela, consequently, these Heisenblasen, right, these fish bladders, they will never impart tastes, bishum panam, they will never impart flavor to the mixture. Right, it's like something that you normally use it with large quantities, and a little bit of iser got absorbed into it. Iser muat shemuter l'shtamish levatel iser. Right, meaning like let's say a tiny little bit of something non-kosher got stuck, fell into an empty chillin pot. Does that mean that you're not allowed to use the chillin pot anymore? Because when you put kosher food in it, it's going to be bitul iser lechatchila? No, we don't say that, because darko l'shtamish b'shefa, you usually use it for much bigger quantities, and such a tiny little bit of iser fell in, even when it was empty. So you could be mivatal the iser even lechatchila, but that's not called bitul iser lechatchila. The guy. Furthermore, achar shehochachti she'ein kol hadvarim shayach b'hu kavush, that not everything can be pickled, right? There are things that you can't, you say bittul iser lechatchila, you say kavush k'mevushal. Not everything is kavush. Not everything imparts flavor when it's steeped in a liquid medium. And even though fish, there is such a thing as, meaning we have, pickled herring, salted fish is a thing, right? So even though the Mishnah talks about kavush, the status of kavush when it comes to fish, we call makum ulai hainu bebesar hadak. That might only be referring to the flesh. When you're talking about the bladder, it's just like this white skin ba'alma. People don't pickle it. It's suffik derabanan, and therefore it's a suffik derabanan, so you can be meko. Right? And since it's bittul iser lechatchila is only midarabanan, and it's a suffik derabanan, when it comes to the stuff that comes out of a fish, like brine, even if it's pickled, it's only midarabanan. And you can add to this, that the only medium that could be used for pickling is brine or vinegar. Right, and here you're talking about mead or med or wine or beer. We call it all these reasons. Right, you can put these fish platters, these isinglass, into wine or into med. Since his intent is not to be mevatel, that's to clarify the beverage. Ulahorid hashmarim, and to bring to cause the
sediment
to sink.
And by the way,
Israel.
before you go on and really take us home, I just want to point out the stuff that's sort of in the middle. At least I know with beer, I assume the same with mead and wine. Is going to be yeast. It's going to be the yeast stuff, and then also with beer, maybe with mead, also it could be like proteins as well. So this
I don't know.
causes the
I
stuff
don't know
to
what
sink.
the sediments are. It could be like.
I am sharing with you what they are.
Okay. In wine,
this
it wouldn't be like the
with
sediments in wine is usually like the isn't it like the peels of the grape?
it could be that stuff if that made it that far. Otherwise, it'd be the yeast. Definitely with beer.
Okay.
So at least with beer, I can tell you beer, it's one of two
Okay.
things, and it could be both. One is the yeast. Maybe the yeast is still somehow in solution, and then the other one are the proteins, and that the proteins really come from the grains. So you wouldn't necessarily have that as much with mead to have the proteins. It'd probably be more just the yeast, just hanging out.
I mean, it's interesting that like when we think of beverages, we think of they're clear. If we saw stuff floating in them, we would be like, ew. Especially when it comes to beer, you don't want stuff floating in your beer.
I mean, I've had beers like that. I mean, I've had beers like that, but usually you just try to there is something, because we are visual creatures. We do like the clearness. Of course, nowadays there are beers that pride themselves on their haziness, but humans being visual, we like to have the clarity of the beverages.
I get the sense that beer used to be not just hazy, but like downright, soupy.
Oh, I think a long time ago. I don't think in recent centuries, but definitely many centuries ago. Yes, I think in recent centuries we've gotten used to this clarity, and I suspect if they're applying this in Poland to mead and wine, there's no reason they wouldn't be doing this to beer as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I mean, the Nodà Yehuda, he's in Prague, he's in Bohemia, which is sort of like that's beer country.
Yes,
right. You had, this is just like a fun little tidbit.
Yeah.
He had many students, the Nodà Yehuda.
Mm-hmm.
He had one who was the rabbi of Budweis, right?
Oh, nice.
Today is Český Budvar. Rabbi Shmuel Kauder. He was literally, and it even says this in the front piece of his book, in the front pages of his book, he was the Budweiser Rav, and he had another student, Rabbi Falk Katz, who was a student, who was the rabbi of Pilsen,
the birthplace of Pilsners. Yes.
Yeah. So you had, the Budweiser Rav, and you have correspondence between the Budweiser Rav and the Pilsner Rav.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really it's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. And this is all like, that's Bohemia, right?
Yeah.
Bohemia is
beer country.
Beer culture. It is, and even today.
When we were talking about the fish bladders, I totally thought you just like throw a fish bladder in, but apparently that's not the way it's done. Apparently it's maybe crushed up or something. So it's like little, because if it were just like a one, the fish bladder in its entirety, it'd be easy to, I'm going to use this pun, it'd be easy to fish out. I said it. I did that. But apparently it's not. It's like crumbled up or maybe whatever. And so then they put it in, and then that somehow attracts maybe the sediment, the yeast, whatever it is, and then it drags it down. And apparently that's the way it works. And so the question that he started off with in this first,
it says it falls down. It falls.
Right, but I didn't know
like
if it was
right.
But I didn't know if it was in a one piece situation and it drags everything down, but apparently I think it's lots of little pieces and it drags the stuff down. Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right. Thank you so much. Now back into the show.
So he says, and this is a line that, it first appears in the Gemara in Psachim, and he says, Hanach Yisrael ein neviim hem b'nei neviim hem, right? That there's a certain, that the Jewish people have a certain prophetic intuition, right? And that's, it's a well-known statement. And it's also, you can see why why it would be controversial, right? That it essentially is, it's saying that if this is what Jews do, this is the Jewish intuition is prophetic. So if they intuit that this is what you're supposed to be doing, then there's something to that. And so obviously that can be used and that can be misused, right? On a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
And there are people that don't trust the masses at all. There are rabbis that don't trust the masses. There are rabbis who trust the masses implicitly. We saw, I think, that the Nodà Yehuda, he sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. But here he says, if they're not prophets, they're the children of prophets. The heter gamorhu, it is completely mutter. La'niyut da'ati, in my humble opinion, mashanirli katafti, and I have written my opinion.
You mentioned earlier about the enduring legacy of this writing down to our day, which is that it is that this seems to have won the day, even though he mentions at the outset there's those rabbis who are looking to be strict or stringent on this matter, but he ultimately, it seems like he prevails, and this becomes even a couple centuries later, as you mentioned, or nearly 2.5 centuries later, as it is, it still is a prevailing opinion about this matter.
Yeah. Ultimately, the key point here is that it's not a flavor, it's not a seasoning, you're not using it for flavor. So, like the rules of you can see why they shouldn't apply, right? There's something intuitive about it. And I think that's also part, meaning even if you don't go through all 15 columns in the tshuva.
For me, I'm kind of curious about this. What was going on in the mid 18th, if not early 18th century, regarding barrels of wine that people are just tossing it in, and that somehow didn't raise the question. But after a decade or two of the mead making, that was now the thing that was really tipping the rabbinic scales, so to speak. That why this is now rising in the latter half of the 18th century, I don't know. But it was clearly a matter of debate over this thing used for alcoholic beverages.
Point. That is a great point, in the sense that,
yeah, people are getting away with it with wine.
People were getting away with it with wine, and people were getting away with it with Ashkenaz, as opposed to, it's an interesting thing, like how the term Ashkenaz has evolved over time. Ashkenaz originally meant specifically the Upper Rhine, the Rhineland, the area around, Mainz, Worms, Speyer, Frankfurt, that area.
Yeah.
It eventually came to refer to all of Germany, and then eventually beyond that came to refer to, all of European non-Sephardic Jewry.
But at this time,
Yehuda, you see very clearly that Ashkenaz means Germany.
It does mean okay.
And Prague, if you look at a map, it's really quite clear, is sort of right in between.
This was going on with wine. It's happening with mead, and somehow beer goes unmentioned, or at least part of the question, part of the answer. Like it's fascinating. Thank you so much, Rabbi Fischer. This has been insightful, fascinating on this matter, and a lot more about different types of fish and all that. Before we go, is there anything you would like to promote?
At this time, no.
Can you share then a little bit more about this Hamapa project, especially since listeners are hearing about rabbinic responsum, and this is about rabbinic responsa, right?
Right. So Hamapa is a project I started together with Moshe Shore probably 6-7 years ago at this point, where we're trying to map the spheres of influence of particular rabbis and see how they develop over time, see how they compare in competitive environments, to sort of learn what we can by getting granular data on where they were writing tshuvot to see what kind of insights we come up with. We have it's somewhat, I don't blog there very often, but we have a site called hamapa.org where we will write things occasionally. You can follow us on Facebook. We have a WhatsApp chat when we publish stuff. And recently, you know, several books have come out that have featured maps that we worked on. And I still have plans for it, but I'm not at I actually have set up an organization in the United States called Hamapa, but I don't have anything specific that I've begun, any particular projects that I'm presently fundraising for. But you know, if you hear this and it interests you and you want to get involved, we are moving in that direction at present. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to say about that. You know, our maps and our you know, I recently wrote an encyclopedia entry for an Atlas of Galicia that's going to be coming out based on some of our maps, and the Nodà Yehuda does feature prominently, including our maps of the Nodà Yehuda's Responsa. We also work on subscriber lists. We also have an index of place names where you can look things up, you know, because things show up in rabbinic literature, place names show up, and it's like, where's that? What is that? And so, you know, you can use that to at least narrow it down. A lot of times, like in the case of Ir Chadash, you have a lot of places with the same name. You know, because any Newton or Villanova or Neustadt or Nova Mesto could be called Ir Chadash. Or even if you think about it, Naples is also Ir Chadash, right? Neapolis, new city.
Oh, wow.
And Shechem, right? Shechem, the Arabic name for Shechem is Nablus. Nablus is Neapolis,
Wow.
new city. So
that's amazing.
A lot of places could be Ir Chadash.
Yeah. Oh, cool. That's great. All right. Well, thank you for sharing about the project. It's really cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. And L'chaim.
L'chaim.